Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's the first installment of the book review, like we've been talking about for a couple of weeks. For those of you that maybe just are catching up now, we are actually diving through Atomic Habits by James Clear. And if you have just realized we're doing this and you want to join along, you are not too late. Like I said, we are just going to dive into the intro in the first couple of chapters, and we still have 5 or 6 more sessions after this. You have plenty of time. My plan is to release these on Tuesdays. They'll probably be between 10 and 12 minutes. My hope is to really just leave some things that I picked up that I thought were insightful and start some discussion on the YouTube channel in the comments below, as we really want to just keep everything there. I may look to do a live session at the end via some sort of social media sharing or something. I'm not 100% sure yet. We'll figure that out as it goes along. But with that said, let's jump right into the content. There really was a lot to cover. This was the most amount of pages that I actually said we'd be doing. And as it turns out, to get into the setup of these things, obviously, as many of you know, there's a lot of ideas and concepts and table setting to do. But holy crap, jumping right in and talking about his experience as a sophomore year in high school and how that led him to where he is today with the whole baseball incident and how that led him to say, well, first off, he was very grave, obviously. So thank goodness that, we would never would have had him around. But then we go and look at how it helped form who he was and how he had to be meticulous in things to get back to a state where he was comfortable and then ultimately flourish again. So it wasn't like it was an overnight success. In fact, overnight success is something he touches on later. And I don't think I quite took a note in there, but remember, overnight successes aren't always what they seem. So that was the main thing to go for there. My first aha moment came very early on in the intro, and actually it was small changes will compound, and we'll come back to that. But you start to think about these things, and anytime you can put things in math or things like that, for me, it's always going to resonate 100%, and it's going to help me tremendously start to think about how can I quantify things too. My brain thinks that way. Not everyone's does, but certainly just seeing that progress. So I thought I would continue the theme of what I was doing for some of the podcasts that I enjoyed doing and presenting it that way for you guys. Certainly as we go along with this, if it doesn't work for you or I'm not conveying a message that makes sense, let me know, please. But I'm going to kind of pick and choose quotes out of key highlights I see. Do I think that'll absolutely capture everything that's interesting? No. That's what I'm hoping we all can have a discussion about and get into some good detail about and support each other. And, who knows? I'm not expecting to, at the end, for all of us to hold on and be accountability buddies, but I'm sure there'll be some sort of bond we form, be able to speak a common language. And anyone else that joins in the future hopefully adds to the top of that and adds tons of value for all of us. But the first thing in the fundamentals that came to me that was a quote that I pulled out was, too often we convince ourselves that massive success requires massive action. And if you recall, he used the example of the British cycling team, who had been mired in mediocrity, to say it politely, for over 100 years. And then they took on a new coach. And the new coach really said, we're not going to change this overnight, guys. Again, going back to that overnight success story. We have to look at everything and say, what makes us incrementally better? What makes us so that we're not the bottom of the rung deficient, we're not here? Or what takes those bad habits and breaks those down? And that was a really, really interesting type concept. So he takes it a step further, James Clear does, and he says, think about if you did 1% better every day at something. Over the course of the year, you'd be more than 37 times better at that particular thing. Think about that. Now, not everything's linear. You can't always be 37 times better at something. But the idea is there's a factor there. So he turns it around conversely and says, imagine if you did something 1% lesser or worse every day. You would be near 0% efficient at that. So I kind of thought about that and said, wow. So if we're thinking about our habits and we want to start forming good habits or bad habits, that's how you quantify it. You look at it and say, if I think this is a good habit or it's known to be a good habit, which we'll get into later, we'll talk about that. He brings that up. All I have to do is be 1% better at this good habit, and I'll see the results eventually, right? If I continue this bad habit, if I eat a half a bag of Cheetos every day, I'm not going to expect to see my waistline be, it's going to be bigger, right? But it's not a desired result. So that kind of struck me as kind of one of those things. I was like, that's a great way to look at it. Like I can either be potentially 37 times better at something, or I can have eroded away to 0% of what I wanted to be of that. And that was really, really amazing to think about from that perspective. The second thing that grabbed me was you should be far more concerned with your current trajectory than your current results. And he explains this very clearly, and he says outcomes are lagging. There's very few times in anything we do, if you stop and think about it, and as I did, and I'm sure you are or did, where you do something and you've just reached your goal. And if you did, your goal was probably not very challenging. But that's a whole other topic. We're not here to talk about goals per se. We'll talk about them in a moment, but not from the perspective of setting them. So his whole point here is if you're taking a snapshot every day and expecting to see massive change, you won't. But if you put that flip book together and look at it over time, and then look at the first and last picture, you're going to see that. But the outcomes every day, you're not going to see that. It's not going to be that clear cut. So that's really where it comes down to thinking about it from that macro perspective versus the micro perspective, right? The other thought that really hit me was interesting because I honestly think it's counterintuitive at first until you think it through. So he says, good habits make time your ally. Bad habits make time your enemy. Well, that's interesting, right? Because good habits, if I'm thinking about like say health-wise type things, means I've got to throw on the shoes and I've got to go out and walk or jog or hit the gym for 45 minutes or an hour, right? Well, that's taking up my time. But what it is doing for me is making me a healthier person. I feel better about myself. My attitude's better. My life expectancy is longer, which isn't exactly his point, but it's a great side effect, right? We're getting those habits so that you have the energy and the mental energy, and he gets into that a little bit later too, about you're able to go conquer and do whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And it's pretty interesting. He makes a point also about the plateau of latent potential in there, which, it sounds like a lot of sciencey, geeky speak or whatever, but he said, and really it just means that work is not wasted, it's stored, right? So if you think about it from that perspective, that also ties back in with that previous quote I just talked about where, in the example of working out, if your goal is to work out to get into shape for the rest of your life, you're not going to do that overnight. You're not going to go bench press 150 pounds today and tomorrow expect to bench press 225. It's a progress. If that's your, where you're trying to get your body healthy. There's any number of examples. I keep going back to the health example because it's pretty easy. And I think a lot of us can relate to either keeping good health habits or needing to have better health habits. I mean, I don't mean to speak for all of you, but certainly it's out there. So we talked, and I said the word goals a few minutes ago. And as you get into the next chapter, he talks about goals versus systems. And this was something I thought that coming from a corporate world, still working for a company right now, we get so focused on annual goals and things like that, which is great. You have to kind of really have that because we have a strategy and tactic thing going on. That's what we call it in the corporate world, right? But really what we're talking about is your goals and your systems, in all honesty. And so he breaks down goals two ways, and or more than two ways actually, but the two that stuck out to me was goal is the result you want. System is the process you will use to get there, right? So which is more important? I'm going to put this goal out there and it's just going to happen? No, that's not how it works, right? You got to figure out how you're going to get to that goal. Now, some of these things may be like steps, like I've got to do this, I've got to buy shoes, I've got to do whatever. But at the end of the day, you have to implement something and keep working on it and crafting it and honing it and moving forward. The other way that I thought put it more simply was a goal is what and a system is how. It's just saying that more succinctly, but I'm usually very wordy. So for you guys to know what I mean, break something down to one word and make total sense to me, it has to at least have some weight to it. And it was kind of funny that I had that epiphany. And in my notes, I'm reading off notes, obviously. I can't do this straight from my head. I'm not that good. I wish I was. But there were 4 truth bombs with this whole goal and system comparison. And they were really focused more on goals to kind of help you get the perspective on why goals, yes, they are important. He never said they weren't important, but why goals tend to cloud what we're doing. So number 1, he said, winners and losers both have the same goal. You don't start out, in particular in competition, but you don't start out anywhere else to say, I have a different goal than someone who's doing well or who's not doing well. You have a goal. Achieving a goal is momentary. You've defined that spot in time when you're successful. Beyond that, what's next? You haven't defined what's next. Are you going to continue to do the habits? Do you have another goal? But your habits can stay. Your goal may not, right? Goals restrict happiness. So on this point, he was talking about, can you say it feels good to blank today? That would be your system. Whereas Your goal is, oh gosh, I haven't lost 15 pounds yet like I was trying to, or I still need to try and lose that 15 pounds, right? Goals are at odds with long-term success was the fourth one. And I found this one really interesting because it says, again, kind of a lot like what I said earlier. You go for a goal to reach a point, but that point ends and it's over and it's in the past at some point. That habit, if you keep it in place, you'll continue to reap the rewards and see the benefit of whatever goal that is. I can tell you right now, guys, this is going to go a little long. I'm sorry on this first one, but there's a lot to pack in here, and I'm trying not to totally rush this. So hang in with me. We'll probably about 5 more minutes. All right. The next quote that came to me out of that chapter, I think it's still chapter 2. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems, right? So wrapping up all those 4 things I just said about goals, that's exactly what his point is. You can have the most straightforward goal and a great plan. But if you don't execute your systems, which we later on find are habits, right? Then you're not going to necessarily always find that success. Could you find that success potentially? Sure. But would you know how you got there? You're gonna want to look at those systems, and whatever those systems are in place determines what your success is going to be, right? So yeah, the last thing that came out of that, as I almost yelled in your ear there, sorry. The last thing that came out of this particular chapter was where the book title came from, kind of. And I thought it was kind of neat for him to call this out. He was talking about how habits are atoms. And that's why atomic habits, right? Habits are atoms. And atoms, as you know, make up things. They make up cells, and cells make up larger things. So habits are all the little things that make the cells work. They're atoms. Habits are atoms that are little things that make the cells work. And I thought that was really cool to think about that from a perspective that we have to have all the smallest parts working so the larger parts can be successful as well, right? Yeah. We get into the idea of habits are identity, your identity, and your identity are your habits as well. And there's 2 challenges of habits, he states. He says you can change the wrong thing or you can change in the wrong way. That was something I read 3 or 4 times. I'll be really honest with you guys because there's a lot there. If you change the wrong thing, that certainly is maybe just a misstep or miscalculation, or you can believe that you maybe then didn't have the right goal in mind or the right habits picked out. If you change the wrong way, then you're not going to see the results you want either in terms of whatever it is you're trying to form the right habit about. So he gets into this idea of the "that's not who I am" trap. And I think this is where it tied together because I kind of read that, like I said, 3 or 4 times over. And then I came back to this and looked at the "that's not who I am." You don't start out as something, you become something is what he says. So he talks about how I'm going to go running today is an action. And it could be something that is you say when you're trying to reach a goal or you think you're forming a habit. But if you think I'm going to be a runner, then running is just the action of a runner. It's not an action you're taking trying to be something. And that was a kind of a mental leap that was an interesting point to me because I don't think you always have to set out to be a world-class runner. But if I say I'm going to be fit and one of the things I'm going to do is be a runner, then all I have to do is go out and run. And I'm definition of success. And then from there, it's can I make myself 1% better at doing that through whatever I'm trying to get at. So pretty powerful idea when you actually pull that together. He gets in the idea of small changes again, as we've talked about throughout all of this so far. I feel like I'm rambling about that a million times, but it really is true. And he says about that, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Might be my most powerful quote that I read in there, to be very honest with you. Because if you think about life in terms of ups and downs, like we often do, I mean, we really catch ourselves in that mode of saying, I was up today, I did this, or I didn't do this. Think about pluses and minuses. And if you're trying to accomplish something or be better, if you can have more pluses on the day than you did minuses, then you did better. And I'm not going to say good or bad because I don't know what is good or bad for you. It's relative, right? One day could be +2 is a great score for you. Some people +60 is a good score. I don't know. I don't know what that is. But the point is, it's kind of that vote. And use the word vote. It's kind of I think it's a little bit unfortunate term, but he's a lot smarter than me, so I'm gonna let him go with that. But I'm looking at it as almost that tally scorecard kind of mentality, right? So it was interesting. He builds on that by saying, decide on who you want to be. Think the type of person. Like I went back to, what would a runner do? So if I want to be a runner, what would a runner do? Well, a runner would look into the best stretching, the best equipment, or not the best, but at least the adequate equipment for them. And they would do those things and take those steps. If you can't do them all, do one, then do two, then do three. Pretty interesting. The last thing he kind of wraps up with in chapter 3, which is the last portion of what we're going to cover today, is the idea of habit forming is trial and error. And I think we often think of habit forming as just, I've just got to pound through this. I've got to just do this for 21 days because some expert said that, or 28 days, or if I do it and then stand on my head, I don't know, whatever you've heard, that's what a lot of people think about forming a habit, right? I mean, it's just the truth of it. And they use the example of Thorndike's cats, and that's where the cats were essentially, it's a little different than conditioning, operant conditioning, but it's very close. The cats were put in an area where they had a lever that they could push to get out, and some of them would sniff the box for 90 seconds, 60 seconds, but they would learn eventually, if I want out, I push the lever, and it felt good to them to be able to get out. So the whole point was that whole learning process. He brings up something that we're going to go into a lot more in the rest of the book, and he prefaces this, so I'm going to close on a couple of points here as I'm going a lot longer than I like to today. The cycle of how we create habits, or as he called it, habit loop eventually. So he calls it by 4 terms, but he first introduces this to us as scientific method, essentially, loosely. Try, fail, learn, try different. He adjusts that to call that cue, craving, response, reward. Now, that's what's interesting here is he absolutely recommends like the simplest idea of a light switch. So if you think about it, you walk into a room, it's dark, you'd like it to be light. Your cue. Your motivating force is you like it to be light, so I wrapped your craving in there too, I'm sorry. The response is you're going to flip this switch to see what happens. The reward is the light came on. Okay, so imagine if you flipped a switch and nothing came on. Well, you learned that particular switch wasn't the one to turn the light switch on, the light on in the room. And that was interesting. So where he alters it from kind of the scientific version is that last point, the reward. And the reward isn't always going to be the satisfaction. It could also be the learning point, right? So he says it's not just learning, it's about satisfaction, where I think before it wasn't quite clear when you talk about just saying try, fail, learn, try different. That try different kind of leaves out that you may be satisfied with the result. But on that topic of reward, it was something that triggered me that was one of my favorite quotes. In another life, I probably would have been one of these persons. I still may be, I don't know. One of these persons that probably like just is one of those quote posters. I love them, by the way. This is not a knock on those folks whatsoever. I think it's wonderful because I love to get insights into people, into where they're at and their thought process. And I think it's great. If that's something that you're into, phenomenal. There are so many ways that we can express ourselves, and that's one. But talking about reward reminds me of one of the things that I absolutely love as a quote. It's Nelson Mandela. And when you think about reward, he says, I never lose. I either win or learn. And for me, you usually see that on the poster with the lion, I think is the one that most people are familiar with, right? We should put Nelson Mandela's face because lions are awesome, but Nelson Mandela certainly deserves to be on that poster. That's an understatement of the century, but Nate, I get it, right? But that's kind of where this kind of wraps up, and then he walks us into the next few sessions where he turns those 4 things into what he calls his 4 laws. And those 4 laws are going to be centered around how can you make it obvious, so the cue. How can you make it attractive for the craving? How can you make it easy, the response? And how do you make it satisfying for the reward? So all in all, that was a ton to cover, 58 pages, which is the longest reading section and probably the most varied based on what I'm guessing on how he's going to approach this. Does that mean there's not going to be a lot of meat in the rest of the book? I highly doubt it, but that was a lot to cover. So I appreciate you guys hanging in there. What I really would love, if you've hung on this long, please, as I mentioned, put some comments down below in the YouTube comment box. Please like this, assuming you did. If you do, click the like button, subscribe. Please share this with friends. This is my first go at this. I think this is something I'm going to thoroughly enjoy. I have so far, and don't see myself losing that fire for it, but who knows? But I want to get better at it. I realize, like, out of the gates, I have a lot to learn, and I'm ready to learn and take your feedback. And please don't be gentle. Please give me feedback. If you're like, Nate, you stunk at this, but maybe try that. Just at least offer me some alternative, please. Look forward. I'll be back at you next Tuesday with the section to make it obvious. So I think that's chapter 4 and 5, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And we will continue the discussion. And again, if there's anything along the way you think we can add value here, please let me know. I'd love to do that. So everyone, make it a great day and take forward what you've read here and maybe see if you can apply something on a daily basis. And as we go along, share that with us too if you're more than welcome to. I'm happy to do that. Thanks, everyone. Take care.